Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We're doing a little bit of a double header. That's why it's on you. So it's my mother, classic excuse. No one can say anything, it's her mother. We're doing a little bit of a double header. We just came from the Windsor Town Hall, which was great. So thank you so much for being here. I'm Lori Kasna, for those of you who I haven't met. I see a lot of familiar faces though. I'm the superintendent in Central Berkshire. I get the pleasure of working very closely with our design team from DRA who are here tonight, and our project managers from Skanska who are also here tonight. They may sound familiar to you because you've probably been hearing about them through the newsletters and the websites. They were also the team that did the Schematic project, and they have given us a ton of awesome attention and expertise that have made this process not only incredibly smooth, but a great learning opportunity as well. They're going to introduce themselves so they can do justice to their roles and their names, correctly pronouncing them. I also do, though, quickly before that, just want to acknowledge we have several people here from the school building committee. So school building committee is a large group of people who represent all of the towns, represent parents, students, staff members, teachers, administrators, people who have a wide perspective, school committee members, and several of them are here tonight, and they've been very actively involved in trying to put all this information together. So I see Sean Varian. I see Sean Varian. So maybe if you just want to just stand up if you're a school building committee member. Sean's here, Kerry's here, Jason's here, Andrew's here, Aaron's here. The work they're doing. And then I will turn it over to Dale from Skanska to introduce himself and his team.
All right, well, good evening. My name is Dale Caldwell with Skanska. I'm here with Tom Myers from Skanska. And I'm just going to give it a brief overview of what we're going to talk about tonight and then turn it over to Carl and DRA. So as you probably know, we're in the feasibility study with the MSBA. If you're not familiar with MSBA, they're your partner here. One important thing, their funding comes through taxpayers' dollars. Your money's coming back to you, which Carl will talk a little bit more during the presentation. But as we go through this process, there's three main things: PDP, or Preliminary Design Program, the PSR, and Schematic Design. So what we do is spring, as most of you probably know, we're working hard through the spring of this year. The three top things is the educational program, looking at the program as it exists today and looking into the future. Also the existing conditions, DRA, and I'll talk more about in detail. They have a whole engineering team with them, so mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection, geotech. So there's a whole team that's been going through the school, here we are today, looking at the existing conditions. And then also we're going to talk about alternates. With the MSBA process, we're required to look at the existing building, just maintain it the way it is, we call it status quo, do a large maintenance project. We also are required to look at an addition to the school. And Carl will talk a little bit more about different options. And again, still we're very high level, I use like a 30,000 feet looking down, so you probably have a lot more questions than we have answers. But as we go through this process, we'll continue to reach out to the community, and I'll go through the timeline in a minute so you'll see where the schedule goes. And alternates, again, we're going to look at maintain this building, an addition to the building, as well as new. We're required to look at a new option. So once that's done, again in spring of 2018, soon, we're going to go into the PSR. So again, we look at the educational plan, incorporate it into the plans. We then evaluate the alternatives. And again, we'll have a whole community outreach, so you're very familiar. There's a website, we'll talk again about that at the end of this, as well as the preferred option. The goal of this whole process, by the fall of this year, is to come up with one option. What happens then, we go into the schematic design phase in the winter of next year, or this year into the spring. So we'll look at scope, we'll look at the budget and the schedule. So at that point in time, we'll be able to come back and say, here's the different options, here's the schedule. Every option will have a different budget. The cost of the different towns will be different. We'll talk more about that because you may have swing space, you may not, maintenance versus new. And then the schedule, MSBA board meeting, this is where we go to the state, April 2019, and we present the one option, they'll vote on and approve it. So you'll have all this information prior to that. After the MSBA board meeting, April 2019, you have 120 days to vote the project through. And that's right now, spring of 2019. So overall, that's the schedule, and these are all the different things we're going to go through as a team. And Carl is going to talk a little bit more about DRA.
I'm Carl Franceschi, principal with DRA. With me tonight, Vladimir Lubetsky is our project manager. John Tyndall Gibson is an educational planner, former superintendent of schools and principal. And Paul Moore here is an architect and educational planner with us as well. We've done a lot of high schools, just, I think it might be one of the reasons we were selected, but this is what we do as a firm. We don't really do houses, we don't do commercial buildings, we do school educational facilities. We've done a lot of them in the last, what's this, 14, 15 years there. A couple ones in Western Mass you might be familiar with, as was mentioned across in Pittsfield, is the new Taconic High School. It's under construction now. It's getting close to be ready to open this coming summer. And in Springfield, we did a large vocational school, Putnam Technical Academy, a couple recent projects out this way. When we first came on the project, these were some of the key issues that we identified, but we want to hear more from you tonight too, when we break up into smaller groups. But we think in any project like this, deciding whether the ultimate solution, that preferred option Dale was talking about, whether it's new construction or a renovation or renovation addition, that's one of the big decisions to be made. And there's a lot to go into it. We don't want to, make it prematurely without getting, all the input we can. The school is great in that it's already started on this path to 21st century learning here. It's a progressive, academically strong school, and it is incorporating some of the thoughts, and I'll get into a little bit more about what is 21st century learning. A couple of the challenges are, there are declining enrollments here, not just in this district, but in the county. The current enrollment is somewhere around 540 students at Wacona. The designed enrollment that we need to design to, it's already been agreed to with the state, is 460 students. So it's necessarily a little bit smaller than it is today. But so there are some challenges with a small high school. Everyone would love to have all the same resources that a larger school has in terms of not just number of classrooms, but some of the facilities, some of the support spaces, things like that. In a small school, we have to be a little bit more creative, a little more flexible, think of ways to get multiple uses out of the same spaces, think of the ways spaces can be adaptable, things like that. So that's one of the issues that we see. We also want to recognize, again, on a project like this, that at some point in time, if it moves ahead, there's going to be construction in close proximity to education. Whether it's a renovation, then it's in very close proximity, or even new construction. The site, is fairly large, but still, building a new school next to an existing building, there are some issues to be concerned with, and we want to recognize those. And then, in most all, but especially here, we want to make sure that there's good community engagement all along the path as we move forward. So getting, yes.
Is it limited to a high school? Meaning, is an alternative?
Grades 9 through 12, 460 students, those are kind of the starting point for us. Yes. So this first step that Dale talked about, these are the literal parts that go into it, but the ones that are most important are these, and these two kind of go together. The educational program and space summary, that's what's really driving the project. It's a sort of summary of how does Wacona want to teach and learn? How have those happen in here? And what kind of environment? It's a narrative sort of description that goes with it. There's a few diagrams, but it's not really architectural. It's educational. And then the space summary part of it is a listing of all the rooms, all the spaces that go into the proposed school. And again, this is done whether it's renovation or new construction. These are done kind of objectively and independently. And then simultaneous with that, let me back up, is this evaluation of existing conditions, which is already happening. We've had teams of architects and engineers go through the building to analyze the systems, the materials, the spaces, and so forth, and put together a good comprehensive report there so that we can understand what it would take, first of all, to just fix what's needed here, and secondly, if it were a renovation, what needs to be addressed as part of that kind of project. And then the other important step is in this phase of the project is developing some alternatives. And we develop a very full range from, some people call it doing nothing, which means we still fix things that are broken, but we don't do anything to change the educational environment, all the way up to, abandon this building, demolish it, build a new high school. And it's a spectrum with everything in between as well. So this is what we're aiming to this spring. It'll be ultimately turned in May to the state and evaluated from there as we go forward. The education plan, that important document, which is well underway, and it's driven by the district themselves. We help and consult, but it's really coming from within, addresses all these things in a narrative form. And what it's really getting at are these things here. What does the district, existing currently do, and what it's proposed to do? What is its vision? The state wants to make sure that there's a process of collaboration. That's one of the reasons we're here tonight, so that it's not just a few people off by themselves deciding the future for the whole district. It's meant to be as inclusive as possible. So one way to do that we found to be particularly effective is this visioning process, where we get a large group, a mixed group, diverse group of stakeholders. It included administrators, teachers, parents, ourselves, educational consultants, as I said, students, school committee members, community members, and we gathered in your media center over a couple days. These were 2 full-day sessions and a couple intermediate sessions as well, facilitated by an educational consultant, with the idea at getting at some of those issues about what does Wacona do now, what does it want to do, and drawing on some examples of other 21st century kinds of thinking and so forth. So it was a very productive session. And in addition, we sat down with and done what we call programming more directly with administrators and teachers here to sit and talk about what do you do today, what works for you, what doesn't work, what would you need going forward. And we've met with every major department or group in the school over a couple-day period as well. And the diagram that we like to think of is that before we can get to a project, we go through these steps, and it starts with the education plan, as we said. And then we develop options after that is done. We're at that stage right now. We're right about where that line is, you might say. And then to evaluate those options, we need to develop good objective criteria. We don't want this just to be kind of a beauty contest, or I like this option because it looks best, or I've always had this preconception that we should just renovate this building. We want to be able to do it objectively and with a set of criteria that we develop as a group, meaning us as your outside consultants, the building committee, and yourselves as community, to develop those criteria, to ultimately make a short list and narrow in on that one solution that we move forward with. And just to share with you a couple quick ideas that came out of the visioning sessions. We focused on educational issues, and these are some of the key concepts. We want to make sure that whatever school is developed, it engages students. It's a place where kids want to come and learn, and teachers and students are engaged. That it continues to develop 21st century skills, those notions about collaboration and communication, critical thinking, and creativity that are necessary. Because, as was pointed out several times, we're educating kids for jobs that we don't even know what they're going to be in 20 years. They probably don't even exist today. But we want to give them the skills and the ability to learn and continue to learn, be lifelong learners, and that's part of the 21st century skills. There was a recognition that we still want to teach science, technology, engineering, and math and kind of hands-on way that's appropriate and relevant here. And one of the ways to do that is through project-based learning. In other words, not just writing essays or answering problem sets, but actually applying the curriculum to solve problems, usually in small groups, creatively, collaboratively. So those are some of the key educational issues. We did talk about schools somewhat indirectly, not too specifically, but some of the key aspects there that we want to make sure we don't lose track of moving forward. Again, supporting and organizing the building in a way that's progressive and forward-looking, incorporating flexible furniture. Unfortunately, this stuff is not flexible. You can't really arrange this in small groups and have this kind of discussion here. And it's amazing in a classroom too what a difference flexible furniture can make, and that was recognized. Clearly, safety and security has to be, a prime consideration in any facility discussion. And this notion about teacher planning centers may sound kind of like a small concern, but it's actually a pretty major shift in the way of thinking and approaching teaching, in that in a lot of schools, this one included right now, teachers sort of own classrooms. They spend all their time, they teach all their classes there, 5 out of 6 periods a day generally. On the sixth period, when they're not teaching, they're planning and using their classroom for that. That's not a great way to really collaborate with your fellow teachers. It doesn't make you very accessible to students, and it really doesn't support some of these other concepts we were talking about. And one way to do that is with teacher planning centers, where teachers may still use one classroom, for a majority of the time when they're teaching. They may not, they may move around, but when they're not teaching, they spend their time in a planning center, which is, professionally equipped. It's got a copier, it's got printers, it's got private areas and conference areas and so forth, where they can collaborate with other teachers and maybe even with students and so forth. So it's important that we integrate that into whatever comes next here. And then we also talked more specifically about what educators call learning modalities, different styles of learning. We reached a consensus among the group, and there were about 40 of us there altogether, that for Wacona, these were some of the most important things, modalities, styles of learning to keep in mind. Project-based learning that we mentioned about, small group collaboration, so not kids necessarily working independently, but collaborating, and social and emotional learning. It's not just about the 3 R's and gaining information. It's also about learning to interact with others. And again, this is something about that becoming lifelong learners, that it's important that this be part of the curriculum. And interesting enough, it was almost consensus that the least effective method of learning is lecturing, of having the teacher stand in front of the class like I'm doing right now for 50 minutes. So I'm going to stop short, don't worry, and turn it around where the teacher becomes more of a coach and is helping, guide some of these other modalities. And a few interesting tools were used along the way, one of which is this scorecard that sort of is a spectrum from this side, which is, you might say, traditional, to this side, which is very transformed and future-looking. And right now the consensus was among the group that educationally Wacona is a little bit more than traditional. It is fairly looking forward and integrating change. The facilities, unfortunately, are very traditional. And if you look at the floor plan, if you understand the way the building's laid out, it's 1960s, and it hasn't changed much since then. It doesn't support some of those modalities that we were talking about. And again, through a series of questions and trying to determine where should we be in the future, the consensus was educationally and from a facilities point of view, we want to be far to the right in that forward-looking, transformed kind of a facility and school. And then we put together some diagrams to show adjacencies of spaces that go into making a high school. In this case, each little circle represents a space. It's not obviously necessarily the shape that the future room will be in, but it represents the function and how they might be grouped. And a couple important points to notice. One is that there's clusters of educational spaces here. Classrooms, science labs, big and small classes, open spaces, special ed, all integrated into smaller learning communities, clusters of classrooms. Not just one large school with classrooms strung along a corridor. That was an important concept. And that if you look at the entire academic portion of the building, then it might be organized around what's now called the Learning Commons, what the equivalent of a library media center there. And the other thing to notice in this diagram is how the academic portions of the building are kind of separated from what you might say are the public portions of the building. The auditorium, the gym, and even the cafeteria, this space, could act as a lobby to those two spaces and be more open and kind of community-oriented in that regard. And that's somewhat related to the notion of security, too, that there are times, obviously, these spaces are open on weekends or nights where you could close off the rest of the academic building then. those are a couple organizing concepts. And we took it one step further to clarify, here's what one of those classroom clusters might look like. It might have all these functions. And you can see it's a little differently organized, starting with the fact that science labs may be distributed in these clusters and not all grouped together. So it's not exactly a departmental model organization of a high school, the way a lot of schools, including this one currently, is sort of organized. It also has open space, collaborative space, kind of maybe as big as this, that students can use and be for the project-based learning or for the small group activities, right outside, immediately adjacent to classrooms, so that it is very functional, but it also can be supervised as a notion. And then there's one of those teacher planning spaces. It's important that that be part of every one of these clusters too. And if you take those clusters and put them together to make a whole building, you might start seeing a diagram, again, that relates to that earlier one of adjacencies, where these clusters are grouped around a learning commons, and they're separated somewhat from the public side of the building so that it can be easily monitored and closed off. And the student commons, the cafeteria, and again, the name change is intentional so that it's not thought of just as a place for lunch or even just breakfast and lunch. It's all day long, before school, after school, evenings. It's a place that can be, when we talked about being multi-purpose and one space doing a lot of things, that's an example of it. And of course, we still need to think about security and control and having a main entrance immediately adjacent to administration that can control visitors and so forth. So those are some of the diagrams that go into the educational plan. The other part of that plan, as I mentioned, is this space summary form where we list every space in the building that currently exists and that is envisioned. So this is a listing of what currently exists. The middle of this form will be filled in with what's proposed, and on the right is the state school building authority's kind of template for what a high school of 460 might have. But it's not meant to be hard and fast, not meant to be prescriptive, but it is kind of a guideline when they use to evaluate our proposed school to make sure that we're not overbuilding or we're not building spaces that they won't consider eligible for reimbursement. They do need to keep a lid on things. They distribute the money statewide. They want to make sure that it's sort of fairly and reasonably apportioned. Then, as I mentioned, the other activity that's going on right now is analyzing the existing conditions and coming up with an assessment and report. We look at all these things in the building, inside and out, including the site and the parking lots and the field. And we look at it not just for facility issues, but we look at it kind of programmatically too, as to how well it's working or not working today. And just, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the building. And, some of the things to realize is that the building is, well over 50 years old. Not much has changed. A lot of the systems are still original, some of the materials even. And there are some things that are kind of near the end of their life. Even though the roof has been replaced in the course of the life of the school, by the time this project is scheduled to happen, it will be near the end of its life too, and probably need to be replaced again. The windows, they're single pane windows. Some storms have been added to them to help with thermal efficiency, but they're not nearly as well as new insulated tinted windows would be. There's some other physical issues, and there are still modulars being used, as you may know. They're well beyond their useful life too, and they don't really measure up to permanent construction in a lot of ways as well. Some other issues, accessibility is an issue, both in the toilet rooms, the auditorium, and some places. Some other, there are some hazardous materials that they're not really exposed, but in any kind of renovation, the rest of the floor tile would be taken up and things like that. This quote kind of summarizes things, though, that the buildings has been well maintained and all, but still so many systems and materials are at the end of their useful life that it's really difficult to continue to maintain them and expensive, and sometimes parts are even hard to find in certain pieces of equipment. So one of the options that we will put together is what we refer to as base repair. We'll just calculate what would it take to fix everything that's broken or deficient or not meeting current standards, and what would it cost to bring them up to standard without even changing anything educationally. So that's kind of a baseline. And when people talk about doing nothing, we like to point out that even doing nothing costs you something, because there are going to be repairs over, and this is in the short term. We're talking about 5 to 10 years that these things would have to be addressed. And this is the sort of programmatic analysis, one of them that we do. Here's a floor plan of the school, the front entrances here and here, the administration, the auditorium, the gym here, the long corridors with classrooms on either side. The colors here indicate how well the existing spaces compare to either state standards or best practices. And the red spaces indicate spaces that are too small, that don't come near best practice or state standards. The yellow ones are kind of marginal, and the green ones are okay in that regard. So you can see there's a lot of red and yellow spaces here. There are a lot of spaces that are a little bit small, or sometimes a lot small. The science labs are a lot small, or science classrooms are a lot small, and that would definitely be an area that needs to be addressed here. So again, there's sort of a summary of some of the programmatic deficiencies we identified. I guess none of them come as a great surprise, I think, to people who are familiar with the building. So, in thinking about developing alternatives, which we're just about to jump into in the coming days and weeks, one of the things we look at for new construction is where could it fit on the site? You know, again, the notion is that like what's happening in Pittsburgh, the Taconic High School is being built next to the existing school. The existing school, for the most part, is staying in operation, you know, with very little disruption. They've lost a soccer field, they've lost a softball field, and some parking, but otherwise the traffic patterns are fairly similar to what they had before. They still have access to other athletic fields, and the school itself is not impacted. So that's kind of the best scenario to think about. So we're trying to identify some locations on the site where a new school might be able to fit without disrupting the existing school. You know, for instance, here's one. If the school, if you can see the ghost of the existing school there is outlined, if a new school were placed in front of the school, you know, kind of in the green area there, you know, is that feasible? Is that possible? And what are the ramifications and so forth? These are the kind of diagrams that we'll be developing in the next few weeks and using to evaluate the options. And of course, in putting the conceptual diagram for the school together, we want to respect the education plan. That's why that comes first. And so we have similar quick diagrams for renovations as well. Here's one that says the gray area is the existing school. If we just do an addition at the far end there, across where the greenhouse is, and close off the courtyard, then, you know, that's one way to add some space in a very reasonable, straightforward manner. Maybe those are new science labs. There are others that, you know, say, well, maybe we demolish part of the building and replace it with new construction. Or maybe we save only the gymnasium and auditorium and related spaces up front and build all new academic spaces. Might be another strategy. So you can see the variety of ways we're thinking. These are very preliminary. These aren't the actual alternatives that we'll ultimately come up with, but they're samples, and it shows you sort of the degree of development. We're not getting very specific. You know, we'll make sure it meets the right size requirements and addresses the educational plans, but it's done very conceptually. And once we have those, we try to use a matrix kind of form to evaluate them. So we list all the options. This is a sample from another project. We list all those options down this column, including that base repair option. And then across the top, we'll have key criteria to evaluate them. And that's where we'd like to hear your input tonight and through the building committee as to what those criteria should be. In this case, if I blow this up, you might be able to see it better. Educational program goals. How well did each option meet those goals? Was the #1 criteria for this project. How did it meet the site and facility goals? And phasing impacts is also another way to say how disruptive was it? How was it able to be implemented whether it was a renovation or new construction. How did it impact the existing school? And then, of course, cost is here too, construction range. And this will be the first time we develop costs. And there really be an order of magnitude kind of cost. They won't be very specific because the plans aren't very specific yet. And they'll be generally expressed in a range. You know, and the range will be 10 to 20% or so. So it's fairly broad. It's just to give an order of magnitude so we can compare options against one another. So these are some of the criteria that we've used in the past. But we'd like to hear more from you too as to what's important to you when we evaluate these options moving forward. We'd like to point out too that cost has different aspects to it. There is total project cost, but there's also the cost the district is going to pay, because you will be getting reimbursed up to, in this case, somewhere around 54% of eligible costs will be reimbursable. Some of these options might include some temporary costs. If we were to renovate, we might have to put some modular classrooms in order to free up space for the construction activity to happen. That's temporary cost. It doesn't have long-term value. It's there for a couple of years and it goes away. So, you know, we got to keep that in mind when we're comparing, you know, just bottom line costs. The other important factor is operating costs too. Some options may be more economical in the long run, either through the choice of materials or more likely the systems or the building envelope and so forth. We want to keep that in mind. But disruption could be a major one, you know, especially when we're considering various kinds of renovation. It can be pretty disruptive, and it can also lengthen the time sequence. In some projects, it's taken, you know, 3 years or even 4 years to fully renovate a school. And that can be someone's entire high school career, those 4 years. Construction going on every year. So we want to keep that in mind. And some designs are more flexible than others and so forth. So we'd like to get your feedback. And so the next part of this evening, the biggest part of this evening, is moving from this kind of organization to this kind of organization. And the tables aren't that flexible, as we said, but we'll move them a little bit so that we can break up into some smaller groups and have this kind of discussion where we sit down. We'll have people at each table to record on the pads the thoughts. But we'd like to hear, these are some prompts to get discussion going. What do you think are the most important issues in this project? Let us know. And again, we're open to, as I said before, if you say, I don't want my taxes to go up, whatever we do, fine, tell us. But we also want to know why you're here tonight, what brought you out, and maybe what you think are the challenges and opportunities that the project presents. And some people call it blue sky thinking. We also have a board back there if you want to add some notes. What I think the new, you know, Wacona High School needs is, and some post-it notes, fill it in, but also at our table discussions, we want to find out, you know, if there's some wild ideas you think we should have a skating rink and a swimming pool, let us know. Now's the time. It won't happen again, but things like that. But again, we'll try to keep the discussion going and try to get everyone involved as best we can. We'll distribute ourselves. You can distribute yourselves. I think probably we have enough folks here for maybe 4 groups, I guess. We'll do that. If we could just use the 4 corner tables, we might rotate them a little bit just to separate them and then just divide yourselves up and join us. And we'll spend the next 40 or 50 minutes doing this. Then we'll come back together. Don't worry, we'll come back together so you won't miss what went on at that table over there. If you were sitting here, we'll share in a brief summary what everyone talked about. So thanks. Let's see if we can quickly move the tables. Can you just grab that info? They can stay group here, group there, group here. It's not. It's got to eat, right? I'll join you guys. Okay? But I'm not going to do any talking. So this is, I'd like to sit here, but there isn't a chair here. There's not even lack of flexibility. Oh, there is. There you go. Because then we can gather around the table. So, when you start, you know who I am. I'm an architect with DRA. Tell us who you are.
I'm Joyce Locatell, the wife of the school committee member.
I'm Dick Locatell.
I'm Paul Moore, I'm an architect and a visual planner. I've been working
Sarah Fontaine, I have a first grader and next year I'll have a second grader and a kindergarten.
Thanks for coming out. Your kids will benefit by this project.
Hopefully.
Unlike some other high school parents who won't, because it'll take a couple years for it to happen.
I'm Amanda Russo. I have a current Lacona student, one at Nassicus, and a fourth grader at Creek.
And you're at the visioning.
And I was at the visioning sessions, yes.
I'm Kate Sanders, and I have a first grader and a fifth grader.
So, whoever wants to start, but I think the best place to start is what you think are the most important issues here, particularly as we try to evaluate any alternatives that we come up with. You know, we like to think about what's important to you as to help make the decisions. We don't want to come in and say, we think this is the best solution to go with. It's more about, these are the 10 solutions that are possible, let's evaluate them. So,
I think in this day and age it's hard not to discuss food safety, so that would be a priority.
and particularly in light of recent events, that kind of issue, yeah. How about other kinds of issues around security, safety, not just armed intruder that comes in?
Well, just accessibility to the school. You know, are the doors locked during the day? Is there someone at the main entrance allowing people in?
Controlling the traffic.
Exactly.
But I think another aspect is
a lot of that
the internal community as well.
big idea
You know,
is
making sure
21st century education.
the people who are supposed to be in the building are safe and supportive. And
Yeah, there's an acronym called Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, SEPTA, that tries to balance,
I gotta speak for
security with being an educational or welcoming educational environment. I think what Amanda was talking about, it involves having like eyes on the street, so there's good sort of natural, passive supervision happening naturally, just because of the way the building's laid out, the environmental design of it, and also people knowing each other, so teachers know kids. So much of this is about, somebody who's either disgruntled or not, satisfied or something, and more teachers that know students well, personally, the quicker you can, more proactive you can be to catch those kind of things.
And I guess in school safety would be the window situation. I like a bright classroom. And I know that's part of it.
Natural light.
Natural light, windows that, I don't know whether windows are open or not.
There's actually been
Maybe
studies
open, but safe.
that showed that they literally, in a couple studies, took the same group of kids, spent half the year in a classroom without windows, and then the other half of the year in a classroom with windows, and measured their progress, both through test scores and I think through some other evaluation. And it was market difference, like 20% improvement in their growth education. And all other factors were pretty much the same, so it was isolated to the natural light. So we certainly make sure that's integrated.
Goes on and on about how
One of the things we have here too, one of the opportunities is, this is a pretty open site, and we could get a lot of good southern exposure, solar orientation, as well as, just for daylight purposes here in this site. So we want to take advantage of that in design. And as we come up with some different alternatives, the school might be oriented different ways, so that, you know, it is a valid criteria to differentiate some solutions. Yeah.
Are you talking about egress through windows as well? Like ability to?
I wasn't specifically thinking of that. I was thinking honestly more of opening windows for fresh air.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking, but I think there is that. I mean, I assume every room must have to have an emergency exit door for fire safety. I don't know.
It doesn't literally have to.
Because not all classrooms necessarily have to go to the outside.
Okay.
Right.
If you build on two stories,
Yeah.
Then that
You don't
Yes.
have to,
Yes.
right.
I'd like to see
Yeah.
the space utilized better than spread out.
Yeah,
Yes.
yes.
Multi-story.
Maybe build
Yeah, I
up.
think,
Instead of out.
Yes.
Does that
Well,
require an
well,
elevator?
definitely, it doesn't have an elevator,
Because
yeah.
of the accessibility.
That's not a huge expense when you look
However,
at
you
the
save-
proportion of cost,
Yeah.
you know, but.
Because it saves a lot of cost in heating and things like that if you're stacked instead of sprawled. So if
If you remember that diagram where we showed trying to find spots around the site that a building could fit, being 2 stories would make it more compact. So it makes it more flexible and easier to find locations that don't impact the existing schools. If it is a multi-story building, 2 stories is probably the most. A lot of our schools are 3 stories, some are even 4.
I ask you how many stories starting to get.
But for a school this size, unfortunately, what happens is there are so many things that either need to or want to be on the first floor. There's very few things that you can stack on the upper floor. So the classrooms stack easily, but you know, the gym, the auditorium, the kitchen, they all want to be on the ground floor. Those are all big spaces too, so you kind of limit it in how high you can go. So probably 2 stories would make sense here. There's also some building code advantages to being only 2 stories. The stairwells don't have to be closed all the time, like if they're 3 or 4 stories and fire rated to the same extent as you do as you get higher, because obviously the higher you get, the more you're depending on stairs.
The other thing is that.
So in a building that wants to be well connected, you know, it's nice to be open, and so you can actually have open stairs. You know, you don't have to have enclosed stairs with doors that are closed all the time. So 2 stories works well. So building efficiency, or space efficiency.
Another thing, and this came up a lot when we did the visioning stuff, is designing a layout that facilitates the interdepartmental learning. Because right now with the roads, you have, and I actually went home after one of those sessions, and it was report card day. And I heard from my current high schooler, do you have any idea how hard it is to go and sit in a classroom and do English for 53 minutes? And then a bell rings, and now I'm supposed to be doing chemistry for 53 minutes. So that has nothing to do with what I
You
just
didn't even
did.
prompt her, huh?
Yeah, I didn't say a word. I was like, wow, this is what we just said for 7 hours. We need to design something where those teachers are collaborating more and they're learning kind of everything all at once. Instead of, so, yeah, it's so exclusive now. It is.
And how to access receiving. And that's kind of, I feel, in the last couple of years, they've started sitting kind of.
That's a big word.
That's education.
Long reach.
Okay. Yeah, that's certainly important, obviously. And it does often enter into that major issue we talked about new versus renovation.
Yeah.
Because
If
in
it's what we
renovation, it is a challenge to try to, you know, reconfigure the building to meet that vision, whereas new construction, you can't customize it. There's some limitations, you know, maybe to the available range, but in new construction, you can make something that does that. It's much better, much easier than trying to modify the existing building. And then the disruption too. I don't know if you can visualize what it would be like to renovate an existing building, but you have to, you know, take a part of it at a time, because it's not all going to get done in the summer. when no one's here. So part of it can, and we keep it. So sometimes, we really work hard to make kitchens or locker rooms, things that we're only one of, get those done in the summer, so that you never without it during the school year. During the school year, it takes one classroom doing product commission, those kids in trailers, modulars, some kind of swing space. You might, carve up a cafeteria, create some classrooms, and then the contractor is working in part of the building, they put up barriers in the walls, they try to minimize the dust and the destruction, but it is a challenge. And then, after that, that takes a semester or maybe a school year. They all move on to another wing and you re-occupy that other one. And these kids move out to the modules and the teachers and the contractors. So it might take 3 or 4 of those kind of phases working around the building to fully renovate
what they already had
in a renovation.
Other stuff.
So
I saw that
And some of that also.
free space.
Yeah.
It looked like a lot of
Having been a former
free space.
I was
Silver, team, and green team. You know, when we have assemblies,
And it's hard for me to see students out there with teachers working independently.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little deceptive in the diagram, I think.
We have that to a certain extent with DLTs.
Yeah.
And I'm not in there all the time. Does it work with DLTs now? And I think the answer is no. I don't think kids are doing projects like that.
What are DLTs? Study hall.
Directed learning time.
Okay, it's study hall. In our.
Study hall. So you need a certain amount of corridor space to get to each classroom, right? These boxes are classrooms, this is a corridor.
Yeah.
The idea with that open space is to basically say, take that space and, make it this shape. So it's that same, in the classrooms
Same
it's also a triangle like this. So you can get to each of those classrooms the same way you can get to each of these classrooms. But the thing about this space, like it exists today, it's purely for travel.
Right.
This space, you're getting double use out of. It's for travel, but it also can be used to gather and to do something. So it has a little bit of double use. So this arrangement is usually more efficient than this arrangement in terms of overall space. The diagram might have been a little bit clearer. It's a pod.
And
the vision session occurs.
students nowadays inclined to use that the way we'd like to see it used or envision it being used. Because I don't hear that in the discussions that I hear.
Yeah, and obviously this kind of space doesn't exist today in the school, so it's hard for these current teachers to immediately understand how they would use this, and certainly the students too. Although I don't know, I haven't been to Messagus, sometimes middle schools are organized this way. I don't know if it has any of these spaces. I haven't been inside. No. Okay. So nobody in the district might be familiar exactly. So it is a learning process. That's true.
But our kids are better than most kids.
So better how?
More inclined to do that than other schools.
Yeah.
This particular
This is a pretty benign.
Yeah.
I've seen, and I'm not here very often during the school day hours, but I have the couple times I've come in. I see students often their English where there's a little cutout with some benches, and I have seen students there sitting and working on math or history, whatever it is, kind of together. So I think it happens.
So we
One thing to keep in mind, in a traditional, what's called rectangular classroom, there's a teacher and then there are desks, in rows. And the teacher lectures for 50 minutes or something. If we agree that that's not going to be the learning style in the future, the teacher might lecture for 10 or 15 minutes, and then the kids break up in smaller groups to work on things, and the teacher wanders around. These kind of classrooms don't support that very well, whereas having a space at least that some of those kids can go and separate themselves, that's where the difference happens. So it's true that it takes some professional development time to really efficiently, grow into this kind of thing. But that's why the facility needs to support the educational vision that, if this is the vision of teaching in a slightly different way, then the facility probably needs to have a slightly different way
And some of your current projects are high schools that you've already done. Some of them are like this.
That's why the people went to go visit Taconic.
Okay.
Taconic actually, as opposed to even using rectangular classrooms, these ones in the corner, it's even more efficient. They go like this, and if I draw it better, you'll understand. It looks like this. And then we put them together, but here's that collaborative space. So it's very efficient in the sense of having a certain amount of space support a certain number of classrooms around it. And people look at this and they get a little nervous sometimes because it looks like a triangular classroom.
Flexibility is better.
But it's because you can still lecture in here, especially if you set it up like this, sort of, and the teacher's here. But then you can also break off into segments in small groups a little bit easier, as well as use this space out here.
And you could send, but if one of those is history and another is English,
Yeah,
you could
that's the other thing too.
have to meet in that common space to do a collaborative. Say English is reading the literature relevant to the period history is learning about, and then they could go to that common middle ground kind of thing and work on.
Yeah. But again, I don't want to get too much into design.
Yeah.
It's more about trying to understand what is important as we move forward in developing alternatives.
Well, the whole, look at it from a different vantage point. The emphasis has been on the educational plan, that's great. From my perspective, the perspective of the public, when we go in to see graduations, I've been to a lot of graduations, been to a lot of school plays, courses. I want to see, and I've noticed that adults, whether they're in Dalton, Central Virtue, anywhere, they don't like to walk. And I would like them to see, be able to park as close as possible as they can. Because there's no limit to graduation. The marketplaces are on the grass, believe it or not.
Okay.
And somehow I like people to park in the parking lot.
Have a larger parking lot.
More accessible. I mean, the parking lot here is a long way from the entrance.
And I've seen other new ones that is over there through a quarter-mile corridor back to the building, and that ain't gonna work.
Well, the parking lots are reimbursable.
No, they are.
They are? The parking lots are?
There's limitations on how much of the project cost can go to site work in general, but they're reimbursed, same as athletic fields. But there's a limit. And every project exceeds the limit. It's like virtually impossible to build a new school and stay to their limit, but that's just the MSBA's way of keeping a sort of uniform capital cost across the state.
And the other thing is that the public and administration and other people use the building for meetings.
Yeah, I was just going to ask what other community use?
Most school committees meet in the libraries of new schools, the newest schools. So when the media center, library, whatever it's called, is laid out, I'd like to see that laid out so that we can support the 40, 50 kids. And we have, I know that we have our auditorium for 350 people, something like that.
About 500 or so.
Well, the new one, whatever the new one is.
Oh, the new one, no, it could still be 500. It may not all be reimbursable if it's that size, but it can be that size.
That's going to be, that's going to be an issue.
Yes.
So we need something like that. You know, committees work with the faculty meets there. We've had a county-wide group that has had all their meetings at Kinesco's in the library. So whatever the media center is, it's got to be supported.
Now I know.
I think that's the right place to have meetings of 40 to 50 people.
Yeah. the new term is learning commons. It needs to be flexible so that it can have both these kind of meetings as well as smaller groups too. Small group students, yeah.
And what I've seen in other schools is they often have community.
And instead of doing this, you can actually have permanent cameras that make it easy for the community TV to.
Would be actually located in the high
Oh,
school.
yeah, that's.
That would be standard.
An outside entrance, so that.
Yeah, after hours, independently. They have to be recorded for public access. Well, some people are a little more, some districts are a little more flexible about it than others. If there is a separate entrance, sometimes.
And is that during school hours?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we don't.
Are there technology concerns as far as internet?
So,
School's pretty good in that regard right now.
that design.
Design allows, we have technology consultants.
And then
It's pretty good now.
What is certainly about that is part of this design system that's probably state of the art right now.
It changes so
In
quick.
5 to 10 years. So that means cable trucks, accessible wiring, cabling, instead of stuff that's buried.
I think the staff can make them.
I don't know, maybe portable outlets instead of wall outlets or something like that.
Staff are ready to make that.
Because it's not going to stay the
Right,
same.
and we heard about the school that was built, and they're already, like, they have a 10-year-out plan for the town. That, so they'll stay, they're like state-of-the-art now, but they will stay ahead of the surrounding districts because they built it when they did this.
It's a challenge, certainly for all of us, the fast pace of technical changes. Yeah.
So that group is.
But like everything, flexible was a word that came out of our vision session too, that whatever we do, the facility has to be
One thing
flexible.
that
Certainly
Like there's a lot of wires everywhere, and now everybody's on Wi-Fi.
Yeah, exactly. Some things though still work best wired. They're streaming video.
Like in this one, we're going to probably have a fiber optic.
It's not a conflict of
What we do now in all our new schools, the backbone of our technology network is fiber optics.
Energy efficiency, I don't know how budgeting works, but you're spending a lot of money on like energy maintenance of buildings. Does that take away from?
There's an option. We can build to the stretch code, we can build to, so one person can have
It's a higher level than what we really have to build to.
Yeah, all schools in this program is through the Massachusetts School Building Authority have to be so-called green schools. It's kind of a baseline. If you make them even more energy efficient and environmentally friendly, you get additional reimbursement points. So your reimbursement, for instance, the option is basically 2% increase. So your reimbursement goes from 54% to 56%, which translates into millions of dollars for the district.
by doing that.
But certainly to reduce operating costs is a strong incentive and a great political selling tool too, if you can at least offset, some of the sting of, taxes going up for the school by saying, well, in the future, at least the operating costs are going to come down.
Storage.
So that's
Yeah.
You do that every
Are you a former teacher?
No, I've been to a couple of schools.
Yeah.
bury the hatchet. Because nobody knows the real story behind it.
They all say that.
The thing about storage too that we like to emphasize, storage makes spaces flexible. Like in this space, let's imagine we didn't have these tables, but we had some other kind of table that we could fold up and move out of the way. Now suddenly we have a yoga studio, perhaps. We pull out the yoga mats out of the storage closet. So having storage immediately adjacent to a space makes it more flexible. Yeah.
So that's all out there?
Yeah.
But the teachers can play, save costs.
It doesn't have any teeth to drive, but I do think that's
They were used to. Greylock, we heard the Spanish teacher would have to give up 3 of her 5 sombreros when she moved. So teachers.
Yeah.
And I don't know what kind of storage that is. We're probably not going to be storing papers anymore.
Yeah, so hopefully that reduces. It's more about some of those learning styles that we talked about, project-based learning, or doing projects requires materials generally. I mean, sometimes you're assembling kits, sometimes you're writing or producing a video. Generally, to be flexible, you need resources that are kind of ready at hand to do projects. So it's more about that kind of material than about storing papers and textbooks.
Probably. It's hard. I understand that with respect to science being scattered across clusters.
Yeah.
There's a lot being said for science teachers collaborating in relating how experiments went or sharing equipment. So I'm not convinced that scattering science in particular is best long-term.
The balance there is, the humanities teachers trying to collaborate with science too, and wanting to have access to opportunity to have common planning time or be in close proximity, so they might be able to do some interesting One way that we've tried to deal with that is sometimes, let's say you've got a cluster of classrooms here and another cluster here, you locate the science rooms like that. So they're together, but they're also part of this. So you can get them paired sometimes and still be part of separate clusters. So you can have a little bit of both.
They may want to share this $500,000
equipment,
micro
chemicals,
What's going on in the school right now is very much dependent on the space. So it may be that the band or a space. People don't
What else?
say.
Check the time here.
And if
We should definitely
You might get
know
a
where we're going to
assignment.
dressing rooms outside of the stage area.
They're not the only person.
We should know what rooms and understand what
and allowing
dedicated dressing rooms. So we ought to know what the solutions could be.
No, we can have dressing rooms.
Well, I've seen it in the
So we should be able to support to have a proper stage, we should have proper backstage areas, and that includes dressing rooms, costume storage, even if we're dedicated space to make sets.
Absolutely, and they need storage, probably more than anybody, at least 3 months storage for props, costumes. And similarly with locker rooms, there are complaints about,
Big Mary Poppins show is next week.
that's
2
another-
locker rooms is not enough.
Oh, yeah, right, team rooms,
You have to, what's going to happen when you have those large visiting? How are we going to keep them where we can?
There are multiple sports happening at the same time, during seasons, so. And there's actually fewer needs for his ed story, more need for athletic team spaces.
This building was built. This building was built.
Yeah.
There wasn't anywhere.
Yeah.
The female athletic.
Didn't even have a
There was no Title IX yet, so there was no, so the
And all
facilities
the,
are
all the
currently.
shop spaces were envisioned to be male only.
Yes, yeah.
Back then, it's crazy.
I didn't hear anything about the music program.
There is one now, yeah. Oh, yeah, there's a
Again,
couple.
that's one of the challenges of a small high school, because you'd like to have, obviously a stage and an auditorium, but then a separate band room, a separate chorus room, a space to teach music theory and or electronic music, and then some small practice rooms. A school of 400 wants that, and a school of 1,000 or 2,000 kids wants those same things, It's hard to afford that space for each of those dedicated in a smaller school. I mean, again, we could put them in, they may not all be reimbursable by the state, and that, upsets the cost balance. So we gotta be, creative and flexible on how we do that, but, the music program here is one, as I understand it from our programming, it is, active, but unfortunately during the school day, fewer kids are taking music because more of the academic subjects, AP physics or math, thinking, that they'll take music and be in the band, maybe here, in middle school, and they get to the high school and they say, well, I wish I could continue, but I don't get to focus on academics now. And so the enrollments in those programs is fairly low. Again, during classes, after school and, clubs and performances is a little different.
Because they have a phenomenal art program here as well.
Same thing, yeah. Art is definitely a difficult here by the size of its art. That'll change. One way or another, whether it's renovation or new. But there again,
Not necessarily.
in an art program, you'd like to have a space you can do sort of drawing or sort of clean, you might call it, art, and then space you can do ceramics or painting or spaces that are a little bit messier too. Usually that's two separate spaces. You may not be able to afford that. Again, you get both reimbursed. We may do like one space with enough support spaces to make it multi-purpose. But again, that's where we need to be creative and try to make sure we pay attention to the budget and the space budget at the same time.
Is there a proposed budget right now for this project?
No, that's, we should have said that. That's really one of the objectives of this phase of the project, is to figure out what the right budget is, not to come at it the other way around and say, we think we can only afford this much in this district, so let's design the best school we can for that much. The state doesn't want us to do that. We don't think it's the right way to go.
The state restricts us on the.
Yeah, they set limits because they're divvying up their funds, so they set limits on the size of the building and the number of students, which determines the size of the building, and the cost per square foot of construction, in essence, the quality that they'll reimburse for. And unfortunately, they always lag behind reality. So what they say is the cap on cost per square foot is unrealistic in today's market. You can't build reasonable buildings but they say, we understand, that's just our way of treating everyone equally. So, invariably, your actual reimbursement rate will be less than 54%, because not everything in the project is going to be eligible for reimbursement. And so when you recalculate, so to speak, the effective reimbursement rate is going to be something less than 54%. But we don't have the total.
One thing, if we go,
That's one of the costs.
You add cost up there. Cost is going to be
I think that's going to be the biggest factor for people I talk to get approval, honestly. Especially with this, I don't know, it's just a shrinking demographic, there's not as many jobs, you had Newton North, Newton South, high school, it's like totally, as you know, totally different.
No, we appreciate that, we understand, but as I said too, we'll try to bring as much information to it as possible, including that option to do nothing. Still cost you something in the short term.
we can't do nothing.
Right, I mean, these unit ventilators are not gonna last much longer, the heating system, the windows, a lot of your energy costs are going out the window.
I think the community will realize that. I don't think we want to put $30 million into something that's only good for 10 years. We're more inclined to invest into something that's new and
Yeah, the notion of long-term value. Yeah, it is important to keep in mind. That, as we said, when you look at the project costs, some of them may be going to things that don't provide you long-term value in certain areas. Even in new construction, sometimes we have to build like temporary parking lots or temporary roads. That's not long-term value. And so we want to keep that in mind when you get the most bang for the buck. You want to try and invest in things that are good for 50 years.
They're doing it for years. Why? Because it's all about
underparking is drop off and.
Yep, that's been noted. I think we put up there as one of the deficiencies right now. It's a little bit chaotic. It doesn't have real good dedicated drop-off for cars versus buses. I mean, buses can pull hoses
And now we have lines of cars, and I don't know. It's going to be for a long time.
Well, the trend is more students are driving. Fewer
This
are actually
parking lot
taking
is
buses.
rather frightening. 221?
So, I was going to wrap it up, so we'll go around the table one more time, last minute thoughts before we come back together.
I think
that's actually all.
displacement of students
It's still social studies.
is a particular
It's just
issue
social studies.
because of the effect it has on choice
Yeah.
in and out. And if we start moving kids around, we're going to lose population. It's shown.
Yeah.
So we don't want that. That's a cost.
So, I don't know what to call that disruption, but
We can't.
also the effect on enrollment, choice.
Yeah, in both directions.
It's your history. Do you think that would happen here?
I do.
I do, as a
Especially,
parent.
I know it was a problem
sometimes
back
it's
in
a
Washington.
perceived problem more than a real problem, but people think, I don't want to send my kid to a school that's under construction.
And especially, honestly, when there's a new Greylock and there's a new Taconic.
That's already running.
Yeah. I don't know what they have for availability for school choice, but school choice is so easy.
That just came up tonight,
Well,
Windsor, when we were doing the same meeting,
Yeah.
they said, we gotta watch out when new Taconic opens.
New Taconic is the gold.
It might draw more kids, whether this happens or not.
We heard that before too, that some people feel that hands-on learning is still very important in this region. And it needs to be in the curriculum, whether you call it tech ed or vocational. No, we don't have any pure vocational colleges here.
It's funny you mention that.
But it seems to still be important part of the curriculum. It doesn't mean it's a policy. To drafting and tech ed.
I completely agree. I think that is very important as a parent. Those options.
And it's the end of the hall.
Definitely. Just with today's economy, the way things are. Yeah.
Retro roof.
One last thing on this. I'll see if I can prompt the others. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Makes sense. I get it.
They'll be done in a year.
Within the year.
But they opted for the new construction versus. And I think myself.
But it wasn't the class, it was all the classrooms and everything. It's in
All the other extra lines Actually, I just heard that this is what we're I don't care about they couldn't, yes, they had to. There were two. One late January, I think, and the other in February. Yeah. And it was the house. It was 9 to 4. It was 9 to 4. It was amazing. It was so So then part of me felt a little guilty because I felt like I was grossly underqualified in having been making the kinds of decisions
Because I
we're
think-
discussing. I'm like, I'm not totally an education expert or educator, but I do. Not all.
It's because they want to build a new auditorium, it's going to be like 460.
Yes.
Well, you got
Which is why
600
I'm
over here.
really kept the auditorium against
The gym is too small. They say the gym is too small. Ours is too small. So if they build a new gym in proximity with the cafeteria, whatever, that's so great.
Yes.
I can see that. People can save something. I'll say, that's a good deal.
And all the learning spaces are back there, so they're already kind of simply,
Well, they're gonna take the seats out of here. But the area is still the same. The
Have your attention for a few more minutes. We just want to take the last 5 minutes or so to report out very briefly on what went on at each table, so you don't feel like you missed out anything that your neighbors were talking about. And then a couple minutes on what's next. There's also some food and drink there that people are very good to bring, so grab some of that on the way out too. I guess I'll start with our group over here. Had a kind of free-ranging discussion that touched on sort of issues of importance that we wanted to make sure we include in the planning process. We almost started designing the school. I had to stop. We're heading that way. I said, well, we got to come back and talk about what's important in the evaluating options. Safety was on a couple people's minds, I think, understandably, with recent events there. But we talked about the balancing of that with control versus accessibility and so forth. But certainly, it's an important criteria that we use. Some others, being efficient with space and being flexible was mentioned a lot. I think people recognize the challenges we're going to have with a smaller high school, but still getting in all the facilities and all the nice bells and whistles that we'd like to have in a project, either way, whether it's a renovation or new. But I think it was pretty clear that the facility needs to support the educational vision. That's probably the number one criteria, although we didn't lose sight of the fact that cost is going to be important too. We went on 2 pages here. We got into some specific program things that we'll make sure we work into here, but energy efficiency should be worked into this too as a way to both improve the reimbursement costs, reduce operating costs, make it more politically acceptable as well, and again some programmatic things about making sure the public meetings can be accommodated, maybe integrated in cable TV studio, making sure we have better easels, making sure that we have enough storage space to make our spaces flexible and to really accommodate the needs, not to lose sight of that need. That's one that sounds very, sort of pedestrian, but it's really important. So thanks very much to the group over there. Well, we won't lose track, as we said, we're going to record all these, make sure they get integrated into the process as we move ahead. Vlad, you want to go next?
Sure. Our group had some similar topics we discussed, like Carl just mentioned, but we started our discussion in looking into the fact that common teachers' planning spaces will be really important for the new for the planning of the building. We talked about the proximity of guidance space to the student and making it accessible to the students, and so it will be important to plan the school that way. Comfort level as a general topic and discussion was important to everyone. Flexibility, the word flexibility, we went through it quite a few times. And then we went into nuts and bolts of discussion of how whether it's renovation or new construction should address issues of disruption to the school process and making sure that, like Carl mentioned earlier, if someone's education takes 4 years through the high school years, how would it be affected by a construction project that may last 4 years? So we talked about it for a little bit. We talked about safety for the incorporating safety features in the new building design and the importance of this. And then we spent some time talking about costs and tax impact and approval of this project and support for this project by the community as a whole. So we spent some time talking about what parts and features of this project will be important to the community to gain support for the project. That's community use for various spaces. We looked at that and discussed that as well. Practical approach to the design. Again, it comes back to the cost and making sure that no Taj Mahals are being built for the corner. Multi-purpose use, and then we ended discussion talking about 21st century education and technology, how technology can be incorporated in the new building, in the education, and what's ahead of us. Had a very good productive discussion here. So, thank you.
Thank you.
That's very interesting. He ended with 21st century education. We started with that. This is pretty much all about education, is what we talked about. Talked about 21st century learning, what that implies, the kinds of change from learning content to learning skills and competencies, and these are very important. And then what physical changes that makes to a school in order to support that kind of learning. So we talked about that for a while, that you need to have an assortment of rooms, for instance. You need to have more transparency. You need to have good natural light. You need to have a very technologically rich environment. So all those things contribute to the 21st century learning approaches, which are much more about critical thinking and collaboration and communication and things like that. These are skills that you'll need no matter what kind of a job you go into. We talked about some of the examples of what they have in the building now. They have a strong business program, which includes robotics in there, and they also have engineering. Principles of engineering is being taught in a wood shop. So they're doing it sort of in spite of the fact that they don't have proper spaces for some of these things. Question came up with what's going to happen in the future. Are they going to go more toward pathways or vocational or anything like that? And no, it looks like it's going to be more of a comprehensive high school, no matter what they're doing. Talked about the ideas of classroom clusters. We talked about the different kinds of spaces that go into the building. Right now, you've got like shop spaces over here and classroom spaces over there. If you mix them together, you into things that are called classroom clusters. These have an assortment of spaces in close proximity. So you can have the building either set up, for instance, we talk about flexibility, you can either have it set up departmentally as it is now, or you could have interdisciplinary clusters, or you could have theme clusters, okay? So this cluster over here is environmental sciences or something like that. We had several students in our group, fortunately. They pointed out that the band and chorus spaces are inadequate, and that's causing them to have fewer people participate in those things than they would like to. And so there's this like one kind of student that's not being served at all in the kind of spaces that are available in the school. So that was a good example of that. And if we build better, you have more engagement from the students. So I think that's pretty important. We ended with technology, talked briefly about the one-to-one initiative that's coming up, about getting Chromebooks in the hands of all the students, and how important it is that whatever is installed in the school, whether it's renovation or new, it needs to be flexible for future needs. And some of that flexibility is more difficult in a renovation project than it would be in a new project. And so that's recognized as one of those criteria that we need to look at as we go forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. We had a lot of good conversation from some parents who have children in the school and who will have children in the school, and a couple of educators. We talked a lot about the building, what the building needs, discussed many of the things that have already been mentioned, but just briefly, there was an interest in the pod concept and how that might facilitate disciplinary talked about a need for a large enough gym that there's some space on the sides. We talked about the value to the people in the school and the larger community of having a large auditorium, and what might be some options there. Talked a lot about wellness and flexible seating and things like that. And we also addressed some concerns, and among the concerns was an interest in making sure that the school facilitated use by the community, by the larger community. We talked about lots of different ways that could happen. Classes here for adults in the evenings, and just all different kinds of uses. Wanted to know why we can't put a flat roof on the building. Is that, I mean, why we have to have a flat roof? Can we have a pitched roof? Talked a little bit about that. A big interest as far as challenges was, where are the people that are not here tonight, and how do you reach those people and help them understand what great benefits can come from a renovated or new high school for the full community. Thank you.
Here's how we reach the people that weren't here tonight. This district is great at getting the word out as to this project, where it's at, sharing information in. There'll be a lot more information in the coming weeks and months here. So it's a great resource to be able to have a website and regular updates on social media to let the public know what's going on. So even if they're not here.
On that, just a curiosity question. I'm not sure if we have to can answer it, but I'm wondering how active they are from the receiving end, because sometimes you go on Facebook and you see the message comes out, there's maybe 2 or 3 shares, you know how that kind of counts up. So, what is the open rates and things like that? Is that really hitting the audience we need to, or do we need to adjust the communication model? It's a kind of curiosity question.
Yeah,
so
we can ask the building committee, we can follow up on that. Yeah. So we'll continue to use this and other methods too. I mean, it's great this is being recorded too. That's great. We know people's schedules sometimes don't allow them to be here, but there will be more opportunities too as we move through this. And it's great that the district's willing to do this, regionally in each of the towns, so that we can reach as many people as possible. This is actually a pretty good turnout for the first community meeting in a project like this. So don't be disappointed or something by the numbers here. I think it's actually encouraging, and knowing that we've divided the district into 4 meetings, and so not everyone's at this one tonight. Some are at some of the others. So we continue to meet regularly with the building committee, and we'll be scheduling future community meetings. We don't have a date yet, but probably within the next 2 months or so. There'll be another series of these, and at that point in time, it'll be a lot more fun and exciting in the sense that we will have specific alternatives to show you, and perhaps some preferences or some evaluations preliminarily done based on some of your criteria tonight and others from the building committee as to where we might be headed, but no final decisions yet in that regard. So again, thanks for coming. Thanks for whoever brought the food. Please make yourselves available there, and we'll keep you posted. Thank you.
Thank you.